The mare's ribs jutted through matted fur like broken fence posts, and she was eating ashes from a cold campfire with desperate hunger. When Farmer Tom first spotted her through the morning mist, what stopped him cold wasn't the pitiful sight of the starving animal, it was the small bare foot protruding from beneath her belly. Tom's weathered hands trembled as he approached, his boots crunching through frost-brittle grass. The horse didn't flee. She merely lifted her head, ash-coating her muzzle, and fixed him with eyes that held too much intelligence for comfort. Beneath her skeletal frame, a child lay curled in the dirt, so still that Tom's heart hammered against his ribs as he dropped to his knees. The girl couldn't have been more than 8, her dark hair tangled with burrs and her clothes reduced to tatters that barely covered her small frame, but she was breathing shallow, rattling breaths that fogged in the cold dawn air. Her skin was pale as birch bark, marked with scratches and bruises that told a story Tom didn't want to imagine. "Easy, girl," he whispered to the horse, who had positioned herself protectively over the child like a living shelter. The mare's ears flicked forward, and she nickered softly, a sound that somehow conveyed both warning and plea. Tom had worked with horses for 40 years, but he'd never encountered one like this one that seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. When he gently lifted the unconscious child, the horse followed, staying close enough that her breath warmed the girl's face. Tom's farmhouse sat a quarter-mile away, smoke already rising from the chimney where his wife Cordelia would be starting breakfast. He'd have to explain this impossible scene, a dying horse, a mysterious child, and the strange bond between them that defied everything he knew about the world. The girl stirred as they reached the porch, her eyelids fluttering open to reveal irises the color of storm clouds. She looked first at Tom, then at the horse who had somehow kept pace despite her obvious weakness, then back at Tom with an expression far too knowing for a child. "She saved me," the girl whispered, her voice hoarse as sandpaper. "When the fire came, she found me. She's been keeping me warm for 3 days." Tom's throat constricted. There had been no reports of fires in the area, no missing children, no abandoned horses. He glanced at the mare, who was now nuzzling the girl's hand with infinite gentleness, and felt the world tilt slightly off its axis. The child's next words confirmed his growing suspicion that this was no ordinary rescue. "The bad men were chasing us," she continued, her small fingers tangling in the horse's mane. "She told me they couldn't hurt us if we stayed together. She talks to me, mister, not with words, but I can hear her thoughts, and she can hear mine." Cordelia appeared in the doorway, took one look at the scene, and immediately began preparing. She'd learned long ago not to question her husband's judgment when it came to strays, human or animal, but as she watched the interaction between child and horse, she felt the same chill of recognition that had stopped Tom in his tracks. The girl wasn't just any runaway, and the horse wasn't just any rescue. Something extraordinary had brought them together, something that would change all their lives in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. By afternoon, the girl had told them her name was Wisteria, a name as unusual as everything else about her, and the horse was called Tempest. What she couldn't explain was how she'd ended up alone in the wilderness, or why grown men would be pursuing a child with such determination that they'd driven her into hiding for days. Dr. Beverly Crane, the only physician within 50 miles, arrived as the sun reached its zenith. She was a practical woman who'd seen everything rural medicine could throw at her, but she paused in the doorway when she saw Wisteria seated beside Tempest on the front porch. The horse, despite her obvious malnutrition, had refused to enter the barn and wouldn't let the child out of her sight. The bond between them is remarkable, Dr. Crane murmured to Tom as she approached. "I've never seen anything like it." Her examination of Wisteria revealed more questions than answers. The child was undernourished but otherwise healthy, with no signs of serious injury despite her harrowing ordeal. More puzzling were the small, circular scars on her wrists, too precise to be accidental, too healed to be recent. "Those are strange markings," the doctor noted quietly to Cordelia, "almost like she's been restrained regularly. We should contact the authorities." But when Sheriff Augustus Pike arrived that evening, his questioning yielded frustratingly little information. Wisteria claimed to remember only fragments, flashes of white coats, sterile rooms, and the constant smell of antiseptic. She spoke of tests and needles, of men who called her by numbers instead of her name. I was in a place where they kept children like me, she said, her small hand resting on Tempest's neck. Different children, special children, but I escaped when Tempest came for me. The sheriff exchanged glances with Tom and Cordelia. Came for you? From where? Wisteria looked at them with those unnaturally perceptive eyes. She broke down the fence. I heard her calling to me in my head, telling me to run. So I did. Tempest's examination by the local veterinarian, Dr. Nathaniel Cross, was equally mysterious. Despite her emaciated condition, the mare showed signs of excellent breeding and professional training. Her teeth indicated she was roughly 8 years old, but there were no brands, microchips, or identifying marks. More disturbing were the faint injection sites along her neck and shoulders, evidence of recent medical procedures. Someone's been experimenting on this animal, Dr. Cross told Tom privately. The injection patterns suggest regular sedation and blood draws. This isn't veterinary carrots research. As night fell, Wisteria curled up in the barn beside Tempest. Despite the comfortable bed Cordelia had prepared in the house, the horse had finally allowed Tom to provide hay and water, but she remained alert, her ears constantly moving as she monitored every sound. Tom stood in the barn doorway, watching the peaceful scene, when he heard a low rumble of engines in the distance. His blood ran cold as he recognized the sound of multiple vehicles approaching along the dirt road that led to his farm. The nearest neighbor lived 5 miles away. No one had reason to visit after dark. Tempest's head shot up, her nostrils flaring. Wisteria's eyes snapped open, immediately wide and terrified. They found us, she whispered. Tom's hand moved instinctively to the rifle mounted beside the barn door. Through the darkness, he could see headlights cutting through the night. At least 3 vehicles, moving with military precision toward his property. Cordelia, he called toward the house. We've got company. The little girl was already on her feet, her small body pressed against Tempest's side. The horse stood protectively over her, every muscle tense with anticipation. Whatever was coming for them, they would face it together. The engines grew louder, and Tom realized that his peaceful life as a simple farmer was about to become something far more complicated and dangerous than he'd ever imagined. The black SUVs rolled up Tom's driveway like a funeral procession, their tinted windows reflecting the porch light in cold, impersonal flashes. 3 vehicles, each carrying men in dark suits who moved with the efficient precision of people accustomed to extracting things that didn't belong to them. Tom stepped onto his porch with the rifle cradled in his arms, not pointing it but making sure it was visible. Cordelia appeared beside him with the phone already in her hand. Sheriff Pike's number dialed and ready in the barn. They could hear Tempest's agitated nickering and the soft sound of Wisteria whispering reassurances. The lead man emerged from the center vehicle, tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit that looked absurdly formal for a farm visit. His companions flanked him like well-dressed predators, their hands resting casually near concealed weapons. Mr. Hensley, the man said, approaching with a smile that never reached his eyes. I'm Dr. Harrison Vex with the Meridian Research Institute. I believe you've found something that belongs to us. Tom's grip tightened on his rifle. Nothing on my property belongs to anybody but me. Dr. Vex pulled a tablet from his jacket and showed Tom a series of official-looking documents. Subject 7 and Asset 12 were reported missing from our facility 3 days ago. The girl is a ward of the state, participating in a vital research program. The horse is government property, part of an experimental military project. That child has a name, Cordelia interjected sharply. Wisteria. And she's not going anywhere with you people. Mrs. Hensley, I understand your maternal instincts, but you don't comprehend what you're dealing with. Dr. Vex's voice carried the patronizing tone of someone accustomed to compliance. The girl is not typical. Neither is the animal. They're part of a classified program designed to explore enhanced cognitive bonds between humans and horses. Returning them is a matter of national security. From the barn came a sudden, piercing whinny, not just loud, but somehow resonant in a way that made the windows rattle. The sound was followed by the crash of splintering wood. Tom turned to see Tempest rearing in the barn doorway, her front hooves striking the air while Wisteria sat perfectly calm on her back, her small hands wound in the horse's mane. "It's like learning to control any other sense," Wisteria had explained with the matter-of-fact wisdom of someone forced to mature too quickly. "Like when you're in a noisy room, and you have to focus to hear just one person talking. I'm getting better at choosing which thoughts to listen to." The most remarkable development was how naturally she'd adapted to being part of a family. The child who had known only clinical observation and painful procedures now helped with cooking, insisted on doing chores, and had claimed the small bedroom under the eaves as her own personal sanctuary. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Tempest graze in the pasture, Wisteria looked up at Tom with an expression of pure contentment. "Do you think we'll always be safe here?" she asked. Tom considered the question seriously. There were still government agencies interested in studying her abilities, researchers who saw her as a breakthrough in human evolution, and bureaucrats who believed exceptional individuals should be controlled rather than protected. But there were also friends like Augustus and Delphine, neighbors who had quietly closed ranks around the unusual family, and the growing network of other rescued children and their guardians. "I think," he said carefully, "that safety isn't a place, honey. It's people who choose to protect each other. And Tempest and you and Cordelia and I were going to keep choosing to protect each other for as long as we all live." Wisteria nodded solemnly, then broke into the brilliant smile that never failed to remind Tom why some battles were worth fighting, no matter the cost. 2 years had passed since that frost-bitten morning when Tom first discovered a starving horse, eating ashes, and the sleeping child beneath her. Now, as he stood in the same pasture watching Wisteria and Tempest race across the meadow with pure joy, it felt like a lifetime ago and yesterday all at once. Wisteria had grown into a confident 10-year-old whose laughter could be heard across the valley when she and Tempest played their elaborate games of tag and hide-and-seek. The girl's psychic abilities had stabilized into something remarkable but manageable. She could communicate with any animal, sense illness or distress in living creatures, and project feelings of calm and safety to those around her. But perhaps, most importantly, she had learned to be a child. She collected rocks and pressed flowers, left books scattered around the house, and argued with Cordelia about bedtime with the righteous indignation of someone who had discovered the luxury of having boundaries to test. Tempest had become the unofficial matriarch of the farm, a position she took seriously. She supervised the other horses with gentle authority, protected the smaller animals from predators, and had developed an uncanny ability to find lost things, including the time. She led the fire department directly to old Mr. Garrison when he'd gotten turned around in the woods and couldn't find his way home. The scientific world had taken notice, but on their terms now. Dr. Beverly Crane had co-authored several groundbreaking papers on human-animal psychic bonding, with Wisteria and Tempest as willing research partners. Rather than captive subjects, the research was conducted in their home environment, with full consent, and focused on healing applications rather than military ones. "What we've learned," Dr. Crane had written in her latest paper, "challenges fundamental assumptions about consciousness, communication, and the arbitrary boundaries we've drawn between human and animal intelligence. But the most important discovery isn't scientific, it's that love, rather than control, creates the conditions for extraordinary abilities to flourish safely." The legal victory had been complete. The Hensley family had been granted full custody of Wisteria, and Tempest was legally recognized as her service animal, a designation that protected them both from future government interference. The precedent had helped dozens of other children and animals rescued from similar programs. Dr. Vex and his associates were serving lengthy prison sentences. The congressional investigation had revealed a network of illegal research facilities that violated every ethical principle of human and animal welfare. The survivors were slowly healing in loving homes across the country, connected by a support network that Delphine Marsh had helped establish. On this particular morning, Tom was putting the finishing touches on a special project, with help from neighbors and friends. They'd built a small amphitheater in the pasture where Wisteria could demonstrate her abilities for visiting researchers and reporters in a setting that felt safe and natural. "Are you nervous about today?" Cordelia asked Wisteria as they prepared for the first official presentation to a delegation from the National Science Foundation. Wisteria considered the question with the thoughtful seriousness she brought to important matters. "A little," she admitted, "but Tempest says we're not performing like circus animals. We're showing people that different doesn't have to mean scary." The presentation was simple but profound. Wisteria demonstrated her ability to communicate with various farm animals, helped diagnose a minor injury in one of the visiting scientists' horses, and worked with Tempest to project feelings of peace and calm so effectively that several observers found themselves in tears. "The applications for therapy work are limitless," the lead scientist told Tom afterward. "But you understand this isn't about exploiting these abilities?" Tom nodded. "It's about Wisteria choosing how to use her gifts to help others when she's old enough to make those decisions. Right now, she's just learning to be happy." That evening, as the visitors departed and the farm settled into its comfortable evening routine, Wisteria curled up in the barn beside Tempest as she had every night for 2 years. But now it was choice rather than necessity, comfort rather than survival. "Do you ever miss the other children from the laboratory?" Tom asked gently as he brought them their nightly treats: apples for Tempest, hot chocolate for Wisteria. "Sometimes," she said honestly, "but I know most of them found good homes too. And I think about how lucky we are that you and Cordelia didn't run away. When you saw what we could do." Tom settled beside them in the hay, marveling as he did every night at how natural this had all become. "Honey, the day we found you two, we didn't rescue you. You rescued us. This old farm needed some magic." Tempest nickered softly and nuzzled Tom's shoulder, and through their bond, Wisteria translated, "She says we're family now, real family. And families stick together no matter what." As stars appeared overhead through the barn's open doors, Tom reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them all together. A dying horse eating ashes had led to the discovery of a remarkable child, which had led to a legal battle that protected dozens of other victims, which had led to scientific breakthroughs that would help countless people, which had led to a family none of them could have imagined. But the most important outcome was the simplest. A little girl who had never known safety now slept peacefully each night, protected by a horse who had chosen to love her and surrounded by humans who had chosen to fight for her right to exist as herself, extraordinary abilities and all. In the morning there would be chores and lessons and the ordinary magic of a life well lived. Tonight, there was contentment in the barn, love in the farmhouse, and stars watching over a family that had formed itself through choice, courage, and the recognition that sometimes the most important discoveries happen not in laboratories, but in the simple act of refusing to turn away from those who need sanctuary. The filthy horse eating ashes had led them all home. "You can't take us back," Wisteria called across the yard, her child's voice carrying with impossible clarity. "We won't let you hurt us anymore." Dr. Vex gestured to his men, who began moving toward the barn with practiced coordination. "The subjects have formed an unprecedented psychic bond. They can communicate telepathically and share emotional states. The girl can actually experience what the horse feels, and vice versa." You can imagine the military applications. Tom's blood ran cold as the implications hit him. They hadn't been rescuing a child and a horse, they'd been harboring escaped test subjects from some nightmarish government experiment. "Get off my land," he said quietly, raising the rifle. "Mr. Hensley, please be reasonable. We're prepared to compensate you for your trouble, but those assets cannot remain at large. The girl has been conditioned since birth for this program. She has no other family, no other life. The horse was bred specifically for neural compatibility. They belong together, yes, but they belong to us. Nobody belongs to nobody," Tom said, his voice gaining strength. "Not children, not animals, not anybody." Tempest and Wisteria moved as one unit away from the approaching men, the horse's movements perfectly synchronized with the girl's subtle shifts in weight. They weren't just riding and being ridden, they were thinking and acting as a single entity. One of Dr. Vex's men reached for his weapon, but before he could draw it, Tempest's eyes began to glow with a faint silver light. The man froze mid-motion, his face going blank with confusion. "She can do that to all of you," Wisteria said conversationally. "She can make you forget why you came here. Make you forget you ever saw us. Would you like her to do that?" Dr. Vex's composure cracked for the first time. "Fascinating. The psychic projection abilities have evolved beyond our projections. All the more reason they must return to the laboratory immediately." The standoff stretched taut as wire, with armed men facing a farmer, his wife, and two extraordinary refugees whose capabilities were only beginning to reveal themselves. The silver glow in Tempest's eyes intensified, and suddenly Dr. Vex's men were stumbling backward, clutching their heads as if experiencing intense pain. Only Dr. Vex himself seemed unaffected, his hand moving to a small device clipped to his collar. "Psychic dampener," he explained calmly to Tom's questioning look. "We learned to shield ourselves after the early incidents, but my men aren't protected." Wisteria slid down from Tempest's back, her bare feet touching the ground as she approached the writhing agents. "You hurt us for so long," she said, her young voice carrying an undercurrent of power that made the air itself seem to thicken. "You put needles in us, locked us in cages, treated us like things instead of people. Now you know how it feels to be helpless." Tom watched in fascination and growing horror as the child walked among the incapacitated men. This wasn't the terrified waif they'd found that morning. This was something far more complex and potentially dangerous. "Wisteria," Cordelia called gently. "That's enough, honey. You're better than they are." The girl paused, looking back at the kind woman who had offered her food and comfort without asking for anything in return. The silver glow faded from Tempest's eyes, and the agents staggered to their feet, gasping and disoriented. Dr. Vex observed this interaction with clinical interest. "Remarkable. The subject shows emotional regulation capabilities we hadn't documented. Mrs. Hensley, you've managed to establish a trust bond in mere hours. That took us months to achieve through conditioning. Maybe because we treated her like a human being." Tom said disgustedly, "The girl is human, Mr. Hensley, but she's also something more. As is the horse. Our research has unlocked latent psychic abilities present in roughly 1% of the population. We've been developing these children's gifts since birth, pairing them with specially selected animals to amplify their capabilities." Sheriff Pike's patrol car came roaring up the driveway, lights flashing and siren wailing. Augustus Pike emerged with his weapon drawn, quickly assessing the tense situation. "Tom called me," he announced, "said there were federal agents on his property making unauthorized demands. I'd like to see some identification and warrants." Dr. Vex produced a leather folder filled with official documents. "Sheriff Pike, this is a matter of federal jurisdiction. These subjects are classified assets who must be returned to protective custody." Immediately, Augustus examined the papers with the deliberate care of a man who'd dealt with federal overreach before. "These documents authorize you to retrieve stolen government property, Doctor. But I don't see any property here, just a little girl and a horse that somebody's been mistreating. The legal technicalities are complex." "No, they're not." Augustus handed the folder back. "In this state, a child can't be classified as property, no matter what kind of experiments you've been running. And unless you can prove ownership of that horse through legitimate bills of sale, she's as free as any other animal wandering onto private land." Wisteria had been listening to this exchange with the intense focus of someone whose life hung in the balance. She stepped forward, her small hand finding Tom's weathered one. "Mr. Tom," she said quietly, "would you and Mrs. Cordelia like to keep us? We promise we won't be any trouble. Tempest is good with farm work, and I can help with chores. We just want to stay somewhere people are kind." Tom looked down at the child, this extraordinary, damaged, hopeful child, and felt something shift permanently in his chest. "Honey, we'd be honored to have you both stay as long as you want." Dr. Vex's face darkened. "This is a mistake, Sheriff. These subjects are potentially dangerous. Without proper supervision and conditioning, their abilities could—" He never finished the sentence. Tempest had moved silently behind him, and her teeth closed gently but firmly on his collar, lifting him slightly off his feet. "The message was unmistakable, I think," Sheriff Pike said mildly. "It's time for you gentlemen to leave." As the black SUV disappeared into the night, Tom realized their troubles were far from over. But looking at Wisteria's grateful smile and Tempest's protective stance, he also realized he'd never been more certain of doing the right thing. 3 months later, the transformation was remarkable. Tempest had filled out into a magnificent mare, her coat gleaming copper in the morning sun as she helped Tom move hay bales. With the enthusiasm of a creature finally allowed to do meaningful work, Wisteria had grown to inches and gained 15 pounds, her cheeks now rosy with health instead of pale with malnutrition. But the changes went deeper than physical healing. The girl who had once communicated primarily through her psychic bond with Tempest now chattered constantly, asking questions about everything from why chickens couldn't fly to how rainbows were made. She attended the small rural school via video lessons, her hunger for normal childhood experiences as intense as her former starvation. The psychic abilities remained, but they had evolved into something gentler and more purposeful. Wisteria could sense when the other farm animals were sick or distressed, helping Tom provide care before problems became serious. Tempest had appointed herself guardian of the entire farm, somehow knowing when predators threatened the livestock or when storms were approaching ours. Before the Weather Service issued warnings, Dr. Beverly Crane had become a regular visitor, fascinated by the medical implications of the human-animal bond she was witnessing. "Their neural patterns have synchronized," she explained to Tom and Cordelia one afternoon. "Brain scans show they're literally sharing thoughts and emotions. But unlike the traumatic bonding that occurred in the laboratory, this is healthy integration, each maintaining their individual identity while choosing to connect." The legal battles had been fierce, but ultimately successful. Augustus Pike had enlisted the help of a civil rights lawyer named Delphine Marsh, who specialized in cases involving government overreach. The publicity had been carefully managed enough to ensure protection, not enough to turn Wisteria and Tempest into media spectacles. The key legal precedent, Delphine had explained, is that the girl was never legally adopted by the government. She was simply taken as an infant and enrolled in an illegal human experimentation program. That makes her a victim, not property. The Meridian Research Institute had been shut down pending congressional investigation. Dr. Vex and his associates faced federal charges for violations of the Geneva Convention regarding human experimentation. Other children and animals had been rescued from similar facilities across the country. But not all the changes were easy. Wisteria still woke screaming from nightmares, and Tempest would sometimes stand motionless for hours, her eyes distant, with memories of captivity. Tom had learned to recognize these episodes, approaching quietly and offering presence rather than words until the moment passed. The girl's psychic abilities also presented ongoing challenges. She couldn't always control when she picked up on others' emotions, sometimes becoming overwhelmed by the accumulated feelings of everyone around her. Cordelia had developed techniques to help her create mental barriers, teaching her meditation and breathing exercises that seemed to help.